Hi, it's Devora Krasnianski from Adai Ad, and we're having another talk in our Shidduch U, Shidduch University series. And I'm really grateful to you, Frayda Kaplan, all the way from Israel, to be talking about this important aspect of Shidduchim, how our attachment styles really impact our dating and really impact our marriage. So, Frayda, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in Shidduchim and just in general.
So I work, I'm a therapist, and I work with individuals, couples, and families. That's what I do mostly. Most of that work I do in Hebrew with Israelis. Work as a dating coach and a therapist over Zoom with Americans. So I get to, speak to most of the people that I work with in Israel are actually non-religious people. And, obviously you're going to see a very different type of dating. The rules of dating are different, expectations of dating are different. And then, when I speak to, young boys and girls who are in the Shidduch process and, who are going and are struggling through dating. And what's interesting is that, I always like to look at the unifying factor between all people, what all people are essentially looking for in relationships. And this is actually something that led me, that I'm trained now as an EFT therapist, which is emotion focused therapy, where essentially you see it doesn't matter what a person's background is, it doesn't matter male or female, everybody's looking for connection and everyone is looking for attachment.
So what I'm hearing then is that the humanness is really what's most important. It doesn't matter what background they're coming from, the secular or from in America or from in Israel. It's really all about attachments, all about relationship.
So what really stood out for me, that it's interesting that since the 80s, attachment theory really started out as a theory looking at the connection between infants and their adult caregivers, primarily the mother. Most of the focus on the early research in attachment theory was done with mothers, and the effect of mothers on young infants and how that attachment, whether it was secure or insecure, would affect the child throughout the lifespan. And then in the 80s, there started to be a focus on attachment theory, not only as an infant, adult caregiver / mother connection, but also looking at the primary need for all humans to really have attachment in their life at any point of the lifespan, or what Balby like to say, from the cradle to the grave. So all of a sudden in the 80s, they started looking at attachment theory between adults, in the adult romantic relationship, or what we're talking about in a marriage, in a healthy marriage. And I think what's very interesting is that actually when you look in the Torah and you look in Chumash Bereshis, it talks about very clearly how it says how, Al Kain Yazev Ish as Avives Imai V'Davak Li'Ishtay. And that a man has to leave his mother and his father. And the Torah uses a very, very strong language, like he must cleave to his wife. Not only he must be close to her, but really the strongest level of language. And, for me, I look at that as something where the Torah, all the way back in Bereshis, is telling us that a healthy relationship, a healthy marriage is 100% based on attachment. We didn't have to wait till the 80s, 1980s, for modern science to come around and say, adult romantic relationships are all about healthy attachment. You're actually looking at the Torah telling you, if you want to have that healthy relationship, the same attachment that you had when you were in, or that you sought, that you hope to have in your parents' home, it's the need for it doesn't end when you leave your parents' home. In order for you to start a new home and to build a new home, you need to leave your parents' home and recreate that same level of attachment with your wife. And then Emir Hashem, ultimately, once you do that with your wife, then when there's that healthy relationship between the husband and the wife, they can then model that for their children. But 100%, it starts between the husband and the wife, and it's something that needs to be nurtured throughout, the couple's relationship. It's not something that's just to focus on, Shana Rishona or something like that.
So when we say attachment, so that's the word that they're using, they call it attachment theory. Could you describe a little bit more what that attachment is, or what another word for attachment, so it can really, if this is a new term for somebody, what are we talking about?
So attachment, and what's interesting when we talk about attachment is that the needs are actually, obviously it would look different in the infant caregiver relationship, between the mother and the infant, and the husband and wife relationship, but actually the basic needs remain the same. And, I would also like to talk about what it looks like when those needs are not met, and essentially they're the same behavior. So again, it would look different in a child and in an adult, but they're actually the same behaviors. So what secure attachment what it looks like is, number one, accessibility. So that doesn't mean that, a mother, let's say, and a father would have to be 24/7 with their child, but they would have to be accessible. The child would have to have a sense that my parents are accessible to me when I need them, and not only accessible, but also responsive. So that when a child turns to their parents, and essentially, there's are you there for me when I need you? That's essentially the question that's answered. And then there's that emotional and physical caregiving. That's what attachment looks like, healthy, secure attachment between parents and children. And then the same exact thing, actually, that as much as we would like to think that we grow up and we become independent and we're not reliant on anyone, we now see and we understand so much that actually adults are looking for the exact same thing in their marriages, essentially. So we want accessibility. We want to be able to ask our spouse, will you be there for me when I need you? And obviously we want the type of response. So we want that accessibility, responsiveness. So not only that you're there for me and you're sitting at the table and we're both on our phones. No, there would be this responsiveness where I get the feeling that my emotional needs are met. And then obviously the emotional and physical caregiving. And what's obviously unique about the adult romantic relationship is that you would also have the element of physical intimacy, which is exclusive to the adult romantic relationship. So, in a child-parent relationship, you would have hugs and kisses, which is such an important part of a child's sense of attachment. That every, people talk about how every single day you should try to have some type of physical, closeness to your child. A hug, a kiss might be a little bit harder with teenage kids, but obviously when you do that when they're younger, you invest in that. Then even teenagers, as much as they might turn away, Ma, don't embarrass me, don't hug me in front of my friends, deep down it feels really, really good to get that hug from your parents and, to get that physical closeness. And then obviously later on in marriage, that there would be physical intimacy. And what's very, very important to emphasize is that physical intimacy without relational closeness is actually very traumatizing. It's not something that feels good at all. So physical intimacy as part of a relationship where there's that accessibility and responsiveness is one of the building blocks to bring a couple closer together, and definitely, a beautiful gift from Hashem, that Hashem created us in a way that, that we should be able, like it says in the Torah, that they literally become one. That actually the Torah says, v'yu lebasar echad, that they physically become one. So there's that beautiful element in the attachment between a husband and a wife.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then is that our adult attachment starts from our earlier childhood. Is that right?
So 100% that our experience in attachment as children would definitely affect the way our expectations and also our readiness for adult romantic relationship in marriage. Because what's very, very important, and this is actually an interesting element, a difference, if you want to say, between the attachment that exists between parent and child and husband and wife, is that in the parent-child relationship, it's really the parent who is 100% responsible for the caregiving, for the responsiveness, for the child. We don't expect a young child to be responsive to a parent's needs. That's not, there's the element of kibbud av v'em, but the idea of being responsible and accessible and caregiving is really one way in the parent-child relationship. Ultimately, children can become their parents' caregivers, but as children, it's very much one way. A very, very important element of a healthy marriage would be the mutual accessibility, that there's not one person who's giving more and one person who's more responsive and one person who's more available, because usually what that would lead to, at some point, it might not happen right away, but at some point it would lead to resentment and the person would become emotionally bankrupt. It's impossible to be emotionally responsive to somebody else, two adults, and not receive the same in return. So that's a very, very important element. And, and I think that's where you tie in the idea of dating, where when we're dating, we have to be aware, there's a certain awareness that needs to be there, that we're coming with our package. And what's very important is that part of attachment is perceived accessibility. So if somebody comes from a background where they don't have secure attachment for whatever reason, there's different reasons why a person might not have developed secure attachment. Sometimes it could be, the parents tried their best and still that secure attachment did not happen. So a person has to at least be aware of that when they're entering the dating. And it's impossible, and I shared something later, if we could put it on the screen, that I think would be helpful for people to see. But before we share it, just the idea of really, it's important to know that, yes, that mutual accessibility is so important between two adults, but it's not responsibility, meaning no adult could be responsible 100% of the time for being there for another person's emotional needs. It's impossible. We really have to be able to develop an awareness of our own emotional needs. And what's beautiful about a marriage, and what's beautiful about, a relationship between husband and wife, is that we can ask this question: can you be there for me? So not an expectation of, you must be there for me, and if you're not there for me enough, the way I need you to be, you become this horrible husband or this horrible wife, because that's actually a sign of an anxious attachment. You're not looking at secure attachment over there. So that's not what you want to see. You don't want to enter the dating, that somebody would enter the dating world, and also the expectation for marriage of, you better be there for me all the time. I have so many emotional needs. It's really a very open question. Can you be there for me? And will you be there for me? And can I depend on you? And what's beautiful about the adult relationship is that there's an opportunity for healing for things that we experienced in our past. So as long as we take responsibility for our own view of self, to know where we're standing, and our own model of self, to have that awareness, as long as we take responsibility and we ask another person, can you join me in my journey? And we're able to be specific and to say, this is how you could help me, then it becomes something beautiful and healing, and not something where the other person has to feel resentful, or, this is not something that I could keep up with. So, this is a meme that somebody sent to me, and I just want to give credit to the author. It says Nedra Tawab. And, I've shared this many times with different people, and everyone relates to it. I would say very strongly, actually, because anyone in a marriage would know that sometimes there could be that feeling or almost that fantasy that you wish this could be. You wish your husband or your wife could be able to do those things, but really it's important to remember that it's impossible. So I'll read it out loud. Even the best romantic partner will not be able to read your mind, give you what you missed in childhood, be perfect, fulfill all of your dreams, give you an identity, create meaning in your life, agree with everything, protect you from life challenges, be everything you need all the time, or heal you. So of course, that there's an opportunity for that in a marriage, but it can't be the responsibility of your spouse. It can't be that the other person that you say, I entered marriage because I needed to heal in this and this way, and you have to be there for me. It has to be, I'm on my own journey. I'm working, on myself in different ways. Can you help me in such and such a way?
All right. So what does that look like on a date? Like as far as two individual people from two different family backgrounds and different levels of different attachment styles. How do you ask on a date, will you be there for me, or can you be there for me? What does that look like?
So that's a very interesting question. So first of all, I think that, such a question in the early stages of dating would probably make someone run very fast, very far. It's very scary. It's very overwhelming to be asked such a question by someone to say, these are things that I went through. Would you be able to be there for me? So I think what's important is, and this is something, I always like to look at, what's my view of self? Where am I? And first of all, how could I work on myself so that my view of other is much more realistic? Because I don't want to enter a relationship where, everything that I'm feeling and all of my emotions, I immediately attribute to the other person and, essentially blame. I want to be able to say, I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? What is it about? And how can I help the other person understand why I'm feeling this way? And possibly, that I could ask, are they able to help me in such and such a way? So I think, first of all, what's very important at a certain point in the dating process is this idea of emotional responsiveness, that being able to be emotionally responsive, both to ourselves, so meaning it always starts with ourselves. So if somebody says something or someone's behavior makes you feel a certain way, do you shut down? Do you ignore your emotions? Or are you able to be emotionally responsive, to your own emotions, to say, whoa, I feel something, I don't feel, the way the person just spoke to me doesn't feel very right. It doesn't feel very safe. That story that person just laughed about, and they're sharing this story and they think it's very funny. I don't think that's funny at all. I wouldn't want to see that in my own home. And then being able to bring that up during the dating and to see what the emotional response would be. Are my emotional needs laughed at? Is the other person able to say, I didn't think of that. I didn't think that maybe somebody would find that offensive, or maybe somebody would be hurt by that. But, now that you're telling me that, I could see that that's possibly offensive or hurtful. And, that's really something that you would want to see when you're dating. You would want to see an ability, at least, for emotional responsiveness. So have those uncomfortable conversations, bring it up so that you can see how he responds or how she responds to your emotions. On the one hand, name your emotions, tune into your emotions and name them, and then even bigger part is to talk about it, firstly for yourself, but secondly also to see how this relationship works. Does the other person respond in a way that feels comfortable or feels right to you? Is that what you're saying? 100%. And the only way a person could really know what feels right, because there are many people possibly that, because of the family that they come from, or possibly even the community that they came from, or maybe they were very much influenced by a mentor. Sometimes it can happen where somebody develops the belief that emotions and show of emotion is essentially a lack of control, and it's not a very good thing. And even in some people can misunderstand what it talks about, mayach shalit ala lev, that it's all about intellect, and you shouldn't allow your emotions to to overwhelm you or to overcome you. And obviously that's not what it means. Mayach shalit ala lev, when we look about the brachas that we say under the chuppah, we talk very, very much about ava, about love, about the love between a husband and a wife. So obviously there's a lot of room in our lives for the concept of mayach shalit ala lev, that a person would have control over over their emotions. But we see very, very clearly from the Torah, both, again, you could look at the brachas that we say under the chuppah. You could also look at so many examples in the Torah. Yaakov and Rachel talks very, very clearly about the love that Yaakov had for Rachel. And, there's many other examples like that in the Torah, where relationship between husband and wife is 100% defined by expression of love, not only by love, but by an expression of love. So if a person, for whatever reason, developed a belief that it's not good to be in touch with your emotions, that you need to control emotions, I would say, that's something obviously very, very important to address, before dating, because it wouldn't be fair for somebody else to have to work with that alone. It's possible that you could develop and, that you could grow and you could tell someone. There's nothing wrong with saying, I know that emotions are so important in a relationship, but it's a little bit hard for me. I'm not necessarily a person who knows how to put words to my emotions. It's something that I'm working on. But I think that if somebody hears that there's a desire that I want to work on that, I think that could make somebody feel safe, that this is a relationship, where I would be able to have my emotional needs met. I think that's really the question that people are asking consciously or subconsciously when they're dating. Obviously, we want to have a physical attraction, but physical attraction is not enough. We want to be able to know, will I have my emotional needs met in this relationship?
So if someone's not in tune with their own emotions, does that mean that they wouldn't be in tune with somebody else's emotions, or they wouldn't know how to handle somebody else's emotions?
Most likely. It's very interesting that I would say that one of the most common questions that, definitely I would say a lot of young girls, girls are asking when they're dating, and boys would also ask this question is, how do I know? How do I know if they're nice? How do I know if they're, the whole gamut of what people are looking at when they're dating. So whether it's, how do I know they're nice? How do I know if they're really as firm as, what I'm looking for, or as Hasidish as what I'm looking for, or as generous, whatever it is. And, the answer is really, you could only know as much as you are. So for example, if somebody is not a very polite person and not a very patient person, if they were dating somebody and the person that they were dating was rude to a parking attendant or to a waiter or a doorman, whatever it is, wherever the dating is taking place, if you yourself are not in tune with that emotional need to, because it's really an emotional sensitivity to somebody else, that I want to be polite. So, and also that I want to be addressed as in a polite way. I want people to talk to me in a polite way. So if you don't have that awareness to yourself, that you allow people to talk to you in a non-polite way, and you yourself talk to people in a non-polite way, then if somebody next to you is talking in a rude way to a parking attendant or a doorman or something like that, you might not even pick it up. It might be something that flies right over you. So, the same thing with emotional responsiveness. If you yourself don't have the ability to be emotionally responsive to somebody else, so somebody is, let's say, sharing a story about something that happened to them. And most likely, if somebody is sharing a story, whether it's you know, your 3-year-old coming home from Gan and telling you about how nobody wanted to play with them today, you know, during playtime. And you're thinking like, whatever, it's just dolls and the kitchen set, you know, it's not the end of the world. So for that 3-year-old, it's the end of the world. And the same thing during dating. You know, if somebody's sharing a story, it's because they want emotional responsiveness. So if you yourself don't have that ability to be responsive to your own emotional needs, you might miss it that somebody is not being responsive to you emotionally, that you share something and they're just like, oh, that's so interesting. And you just shared something really, you know, really personal, or really something that was very, very transformational in your life. And the response is very interesting. And then you would not do that for the same person. So definitely, I would say there's a lot of work to do over there.
So if both of them are not responsive, are there both, does that work?
So that's a very interesting question, because, you know, there's definitely differences. Let's say, if you want to say the spectrum of, you know, both in the levels of attachment that what people are looking for and in emotional responsiveness. So it's interesting, you know, that like sometimes when I'll speak to a group of girls and I'll ask them, how many of you have an expectation that your husband will be your best friend? And, you know, not necessarily people like to raise their hands. Some people will raise their hands. Some people might raise their hand, and deep down, maybe that's not the model that they have, in the sense that maybe what they saw at home, they don't have an expectation that my husband or my wife has to be my best friend, in the sense that, you know, maybe that the person that I laugh with about everything, or the person that I would confide in on small details of my life. Some people have that expectation, and if they do, it's most likely something that they saw at home. And some people look at their need for attachment more on life and death level. You know, so if I could give an example, let's say, you know, there's some people who have a need to get on the phone with their husband and wife, or their husband or wife, you know, and say, oh my gosh, I was driving home from work. I was just stuck in traffic for 2 hours and I'm totally stressed out. Oh, whatever. I just had to tell you that. And, you know, get that emotional response, get that validation. And for some people, they don't see that. They don't see that need. And if it works for both, if Gottman did this research, if people are basically in the same place as far as their in affect, you know, and their emotional expectations, then it can work, you know. And then there's some people in, let's say, if you look at Viktor Frankl, the way Viktor Frankl described the power of human attachment in the concentration camps, and he talks about how people who had, you know, something that they were fighting for, whether it was that they thought their child was still alive, or there was someone in the camps with them that, you know, they would each make sure that the other one had food, they would save a piece of bread for their friend. That alone gave them enough meaning to survive, and not necessarily was it the strongest person. So some people look at, you know, their relationship, you know, husband and wife, that I want someone more on a survival level. I want someone to be there for me for life and death issues, not necessarily for daily life issues. For daily life issues, I see myself more looking to my coworkers or my siblings or something like that. And if both of them are in the same place, then it can work.
Interesting. So let's go back to the different types of attachments. You mentioned that there's the secure, and then there's some other attachments, styles. And can we go through those quickly? And then part 2 of that question is, do certain styles work better than others with each other?
So I would say that there's styles of attachment, but really there's secure attachment, and then there's different styles of insecure attachment. And it's important to know what those styles of insecure attachment are when we're treating them. But really, insecure attachment is something that should be worked on. And it's interesting, you know, what I just mentioned about people, not necessarily is someone insecurely attached if sometimes it could be like a personality. They don't necessarily, want to confide. They don't want someone talking to them about all, little details. They want to be either very focused on their business or, very focused on their home life. Not necessarily they have that need to share, and still, they look at the need for responsiveness and accessibility on more major life issues. And some people have a need to even share, smaller life issues. But really, I think it's important to, to clarify that secure attachment, basically what it looks like, people who are in secure attachment, number one, have a very, very healthy view of self. So they look at themselves as lovable, as being able to be loved, as being worthy of love, which is a very, very important element. And most likely that's a result of secure attachment, in childhood. So that's what secure attachment looks like. They don't tend to catastrophize, meaning their expectations, people who are securely attached, when they don't over analyze their, their husband or their wife's behavior, like, why didn't they say this, or why didn't they do this? They feel like, I'm okay, I'm securely attached. Like, I once read a story of this woman that she was talking about how her husband, he's not the type to buy gifts. So she'll buy herself perfume for her birthday or makeup for her birthday. And then she'll tell him, by the way, you bought me some makeup for my birthday. So, and obviously it works for her. There's a lot of people who will hear such a story and they're horrified. They say, oh my gosh, how could she be happy in such a relationship? How could she tolerate that he forgets her birthday, so obviously, to me, it sounds, I don't know this woman. I read this story. It sounds like someone who's very securely attached, and she knows that her husband really, really cares about her, and, that he's there for her when she needs him in the way that she needs him. And for her, she's able to say, I don't mind to go out and buy, myself the perfume, or to buy myself the flowers. And I know that when I tell him, by the way, you bought me a present today, he'll be very, very happy. For some people, obviously that doesn't work, but I think, not everyone has to be like that in order to be securely attached. But I think that's an example of someone who's very, very securely, has a very secure level of attachment, where I don't need, and I know that there's the language of love. There's different languages of love that some people, gift giving is a language of love for them. But, even if gift giving is a language of love, it could still be somebody who says, okay, even if the person forgets to buy me a gift, I know that if I buy the gift, or if I remind them, that it still means a lot to me, because I know they really care. So that's an example of secure attachment. And then when we talk about insecure attachment, we're looking at either anxious attachment. And what anxious attachment, that's one example. What anxious attachment would look like, it would look like somebody who has a need to kind of be aggressive in their need to remind the other person that I need that, that attachment. So they might be, in EFT, in emotion focused therapy, we would call this person a pursuer, possibly. That they're really going out there, and it could even express itself in aggressive ways. There might be these messages in Hebrew, you call it, hodaot nachas, like these really aggressive type of messaging on WhatsApp, sending these long, why didn't you do this? And why did you say this? And very, a lot of use of criticism. That would be, you would see an anxious attachment. And then we also have basically avoidant attachment, which is where a person, unfortunately, completely gives up on being able to be securely attached, and for whatever reason, they can't leave the relationship. So whether, obviously in a child, parent-child relationship, a young child, can't just get up and leave the relationship. And even, in a marriage, not everybody, just because they're not having a securely attached marriage, has the luxury or even wants to just get up and leave. People maybe deep down have a hope that things could get better. But what avoidant attachment would look like is really where a person detaches themselves emotionally and they try to convince themselves, I don't even need to be attached. I don't even need this person. So obviously that would be insecure attachment. And then we have something that with children, it would be called disorganized attachment. And in adults, it's more referred to as fearful avoidant. And that's really where you have this extreme desire for closeness. And then you would also see this extreme expression of pushing away. So in a child, it might look like, that the child clings and is really looking for, screams when the parent leaves the house and, really has this strong desire for attachment. And then when the parent comes over for a hug, the child might push them away. So you might see the same thing in a husband and wife relationship where someone might make all sorts of either verbal or behavioral expressions of wanting closeness. And then when the opportunity for closeness actually comes, they push it away. And that's actually something, for example, where you might see people struggle in, the area of physical intimacy, where they don't get the closeness and the attachment that they need, in emotionally. And then when it comes to physical attachment, physical intimacy, even though they want it so badly, they're not there. They don't feel it, so they push away.
Interesting. Does someone, this fearful attachment, is that something that they can recognize in themselves as a teenager or young adult, or does that come actually in the marriage?
So I think that you could recognize it within an attachment relationship. So you need to be, and I think it's very important to emphasize that not all relationships are appropriate to have a full model of secure attachment. So let's say not every relationship is appropriate that there would be this very, very strong responsiveness or very, very strong, accessibility. There's certain relationships where it shouldn't be like that, and an example of this could be, let's say, between a male teacher and a female student. So that's an example where there should not be any sort of level of, attachment or closeness. But sometimes if somebody did not get the level of secure attachment that they needed from their primary caregiver, then sometimes it could be, that expression that everybody needs one adult to believe in them. So, if it's, let's say, you hear so many stories of a teacher who basically takes a child under their wing and gives them that experience. It could be a foster parent or an adoptive parent, or sometimes it could even be, it could even be a friend, and also I would say in a friend, you have to be careful, that it has to be a healthy level of dependency, that there should be no form of codependency happening. So I would say in most cases, if it's a young person, it should be an adult. It should be, not in most cases, I would say in all cases, an adult and a young person, and that a person, yes, hopefully is able to get that awareness before they enter the adult romantic world, before they're ready to date. I think that's very important, that a person should be able to be aware. And, I'll just give an example from the world of EFT, from emotion-focused therapy, which one of the beautiful things I think about this therapy is the recognition when you look at things through an attachment lens, then you're able to, I think a lot of therapies can possibly pathologize many behaviors. A person is either using drugs, or a person is on their phone the whole day, or a person wants to be alone the whole day, or a person is using very aggressive language, or is very critical. And there's all kinds of ways of pathologizing. And when you look at it through attachment lens, you can basically ask the question, is the person getting the attachment needs, are their attachment needs being met? And then you're able to introduce couples to the concept that possibly there's an unhealthy loop, an unhealthy I'm missing the word, like, yeah, an unhealthy loop that's basically exists between the couples and then the couple can blame the loop. So for example, what that would look like is that one person has their attachment needs are not being met, and usually, you hear me?
I lost you for a minute, but go ahead.
Okay, so stereotypically that would be the woman, where a woman would most likely pursue. And, she might be critical and aggressive in her desire or her attempt to have her attachment needs met. And what that could do, that could stereotypically, again, for the male, could scare the male that I will not be able to rise to the level, or I'm not good enough, or, I'm not able to meet your attachment needs. And then they would withdraw. And that withdrawal behavior is inherently traumatizing and disturbing for the wife. Again, stereotypically, it would be the wife, and then she would try even harder. So that loop would continue. And when the couple is able to recognize what's happening between them, so all of a sudden they can, instead of pathologizing all kinds of behaviors, we could say, okay, maybe this behavior, maybe this depression, there's even relational distress. So a person could say, maybe I'm acting like that, or maybe I'm thinking like that because of what's happening in my relationship. And, here's again, this like challenge between balancing of taking responsibility for having my emotional needs met and being able to express my emotional needs in a healthy way. And at the same time, recognizing the opportunity that exists within the couple's relationship for both of them to heal and to experience this, which is really the ultimate level of attachment, because it's a much higher level of attachment that exists between the parent and child, because it also includes the concept, of physical intimacy. So it's really the ultimate level of attachment.
So taking this back to people who are dating, so they should get a good sense of if they are secure and if they're not secure. So how can they do that?
So again, I think being able to walk away with a feeling that this person understands me emotionally. And it's actually very interesting that for many people, that's the, if I could say, the clincher, that's like what closes it for them. When a person says, yes, I feel that this person, that they get me. I know Gottman, he uses this term that, do you get me? Because to be able to say to somebody, I love you is actually very easy to say, because, I love you, I love what you do for me, or I love the way you are, you're a great person. But to be able to say to another person, and that person actually feels, when you say to someone, I get you, I know what you're talking about, and the person feels understood and they feel seen, that's huge. And actually there is research that shows that, emotional responsiveness in newlyweds is actually a very, very strong predictor of marital happiness, in the long term, being able to stay married long term. And I think it's so important for people to know at any stage, anybody who's listening to this, whether they're before entering dating, or they are dating, or they're already married, that you can always work on it. That one of the beautiful things of the husband and wife relationship is that your sense of attachment can evolve, but it has to be, it's very, very important, that you could go back to that meme, maybe you want to share it, if any listeners want it later, that remembering that, yes, within the husband and wife relationship, there's that very strong, that big, beautiful opportunity for the attachment to be formed and maintained and even revised. I think it's very important, that idea that people remember that your secure attachment, your sense of secure attachment can be revised through emotional communication. But it's emotional communication, healthy communication always starts with a very healthy view of self, where you're able to say, to take responsibility for your emotions, and there's no blame and there's no criticism, because that's not what healthy emotional communication looks like. And attachment needs cannot be, the sense of secure attachment cannot be revised within emotional communication that's all about blame and criticism.
All right. So assessing yourself to see if you or yourself have enough security in your attachments. Is that looking at your friendships, looking at the way you talk to your parents, your siblings? How do we assess that we're ready enough? Of course, if we're looking for ourselves.
Question. Sorry, that's a great question, because there's many, you could, if somebody actually would want to do, obviously the best way, if somebody's worried, I think, a person could speak to a therapist or a coach. And I think that's a great conversation to have, or, a dating coach, or again, a therapist, someone that makes them feel, someone who's focused on the emotional aspect of a relationship and of the person themselves. But actually, if a person just wants to get a start, there's all types of questionnaires online, actually, that could really give you some type of clue, to clue yourself in and really to start opening and asking yourself questions. One of the things, there's a questionnaire you can find online about how differentiated I am. So when we talk about differentiated, it refers to our ability to differentiate ourselves from other people's behavior, from other people's behavior. So instead of looking at someone's behavior and saying, oh, it's all about me, they're doing that, they don't like me. The reason I didn't get accepted for the job is because, they didn't like me, or because they're whatever, to blame the other person for basically something that I need to work on for myself. It is possible that in a job interview, you could experience discrimination. Obviously, it's possible, but it's much healthier to walk away from, let's say, said job interview and to say, maybe I wasn't prepared enough. And, or maybe that person, maybe the interviewer was having a bad day, or maybe I really didn't give off my best self. Maybe I'm much more assertive or much more appropriate for the job than the feeling that I gave. So if you find yourself to be very reactive, to things that happen around you, that you constantly blame other people for things that are going wrong in your life, that you find yourself very, very easily getting hurt by all kinds of people, meaning both in your family, in the workplace, your neighbor. Maybe I work on the emotional, to not be so reactive. Maybe I'm way too reactive for anybody to be able to handle. It's not fair to have that expectation for anyone to have to handle this level of emotional reactiveness.
So I'm also hearing is that same list, is that when you're looking for somebody else when you're dating, do they blame everybody? Do they ever take responsibility, or where do they take responsibility for what happened? Is it the boss that there was, and their friendship and their teacher, and everyone else was wrong and they were never wrong? So if you're seeing something like that, then you can decide what you want to do about that. But that's what you're looking for. Is there a sense of
a great point. That, obviously, if you were dating, it would definitely be, a red flag. If somebody, every story that they speak, the teachers were crazy, and, my parents weren't good enough, and my friends were not sensitive to me, and, so on and so forth, it might be a red flag to say, can this person be open to an open, communicative, emotional conversation where I would be able to express my emotional, because really what a healthy emotional conversation looks like, a healthy emotional communication is I'm able to express myself emotionally, to say, this is the way I feel. And literally what a healthy communication looks like, emotional communication, is to walk away with the feeling that I was seen, meaning that I was validated. That's what people are looking for. They're not looking necessarily for you to solve your problem, because not necessarily, if somebody comes home and says, oh my gosh, my boss is impossible, and they, and he's giving us way too much work, and, whatever. Yeah, that sounds what people really, not necessarily are you able to solve the problem of the boss. It might be a very good boss, he might pay very fairly, but he might himself, they might be going through a very stressful time, let's say in an accounting firm, or, I have a friend that she works in a designer firm. So the end of the year when they have all the sales and there's a lot of pressure. So she knows that her boss is under tremendous pressure. So still, she might come to me and she might tell me, it's impossible. My boss is under crazy pressure. My workplace is like a pressure cooker. So if I come to her and I say, maybe you could really start thinking about what it's like to be in your boss's shoes. That's not what she needs. All she wants is to be seen and be heard. So if I say, that sounds crazy, I'm sure, you can't wait for the month of December to be over. And, you're going to get that week of vacation, and you'll start off the new, the new year, and things will be much calmer at the office. I'm sure that's what you're looking for. And I can't wait. Let's make a date. We'll go out together, for lunch or something once things get calmer, but it totally sounds nuts now. That's it. That's a great feeling.
So also something that you said earlier got me thinking about the idea of looking to see if the other person has a growth mindset, and not that this is who I am, I always get angry, work with it or not, or things like that. So we're looking to see that someone's willing to grow with you and for the relationship. So I just wanted to throw that back also into there.
That's so 100%, that you, again, that feeling of somebody gets me, they get that I'm not perfect, they get that I'm working on myself, they're emotionally responsive when I bring up something that happened to me. They're curious, they really interested in, what happened to me, and I really think we could grow together. And, I'm looking forward to strengthening, so we could really look at it through a positive, even if we had the most secure level of attachment as children. Obviously, we don't want to say, okay, that was a good run. I had a good attachment in my childhood, whatever. It's not so important in the next chapter of my life. Obviously, that's not what we're saying. So if we had this beautiful, secure attachment in our childhood, we really want to be able to say, let me make sure to continue that. I want to continue having that same level of secure, beautiful, emotionally connected level of attachment. And that will be a beautiful, beautiful setting, Emerit Hashem, for me to raise my children in.
So just to kind of wrap that up, we're looking for, in the dating, to have some experiences of actually seeing that your attachment styles or your emotional, that the other one is responsive, and that you're responsive in the way that they need to be responsive. So it's not just going through a list of a checklist. Okay, so we have similar families, we have similar interests, or it's okay that we don't have similar interests because I'm okay with that. We're actually looking for some time of that you have experiences of seeing how you respond to each other.
100%. I always recommend to boys and girls who are dating, I think it's so important to share stories and to really to the why, and wow, why did that happen? Because stories really, as opposed to, those really closed type of questions of what are your interests, what do you want in life, what are your even belief systems? These are all important things, chinuch of kids, and then obviously a very, very important thing about, fiscal. I always tell, I don't think it's healthy to marry someone who has a different relationship to money than you. That you
did a
need
whole
to
podcast on talking about money, so look out for that one.
So important. It's so amazing that you do that, because but that's not enough. Meaning just being aligned, fiscally, and just being aligned. When I say fiscally, fiscal beliefs, and just being aligned in chinuch beliefs and frumkeit and Hasidishkeit. That's not enough. You really need to have that just to see the potential. Again, Mirza Hashem, you have a whole lifetime ahead of you. So you don't need to have that sense of connection of two people who were married for 70 years in order to get engaged. Obviously not, but to have that feeling, wow, this person can be emotionally responsive to me, and I can be emotionally responsive to this person. And I think, like you mentioned, there's this beautiful, beautiful room for growth. I think the key here is what you talk about, mutual accessibility. That's the feeling that you want to have. I really feel like I can be there for this person. And the way, the stories that I shared and the way this person responded to me when I spoke about things that bothered me, I really feel that this person could be responsive to me. That's a great, great feeling to be able to have, before, essentially, when you're walking to the chuppah.
Amen. That's really what we're looking for, is not the same exact interests, but really similar. I think that was a really great talk about the importance of attachment styles and to actually tune into yourself and to what's going on in the dating. So thank you, Frayda.